Welcome back to the new format of our podcast. Ramiro is a little bit under the weather today, so I am going back solo, but he is here in the room with me. So I will be glancing at him to see if he has anything he wants to add. So in this episode, we are continuing to talk about just how we respond to and address things as they come up with our students here at Starfish Social Club. Today, we are talking about students sharing examples of them using what they have learned here in the real world. Conversations that we had with kids about the difference between laughing at a person versus a situation. Talking about how we handle when kids get upset with other kids, how we handle kiddos who don't want to participate, and also a conversation about context. So lots of stuff coming up, probably just going to get through one day's worth of things that have happened here at Starfish in today's episode. So here we go. One of the really cool things that happens is when kids come back to the next lesson or the next game time and share a story of them trying something or implementing something or even talking to somebody about something that we've been teaching them. So this happens quite often, especially with kids who are social sponges, that they come here and they learn things, they hear things, and then they just really want to go out and do them and use them. A couple weeks ago, we talked about the concept of saving face when we were talking about the social fake. Social fake is pretending something for the purpose of our reputation. Classic example is pretending that we're interested in what somebody's talking about because there's somebody that we want to get to know better. So they might have their own special interests, and we go along with that conversation because it's helpful for our reputation for us to do so. When we were talking about that concept, we were talking about saving face, which is basically when we have something that might be embarrassing or just something that makes us feel a little awkward or uncomfortable, and maybe other people are laughing about it. So if we trip, if we get our words mixed up and end up saying something silly, examples like that where it might be embarrassing, but we notice other people are laughing about it. We talked about how we can play it off and just laugh about it too. It's always okay to feel embarrassed. It's always okay to feel ashamed, frustrated, upset. All of our emotions are always okay. Keeping in mind that we have a reputation we're trying to maintain helps us think about how we might want to respond in a situation like that. So we had taught the kids how we can go along with things like that when something embarrassing like that happens, and we can just kind of laugh along with it as well. So a student came back the next week and was telling us that at his school, when his class is going to, I think it was PE, that there are older kids in the gym that are playing basketball. And he happened to be walking behind the basketball, the board, the headboard, right? Yes. I used to play basketball, and for some reason, yeah, it's not a headboard, that's a bedroom. The basketball net, it's not a goal post, that's football. Okay. So he was walking basically where the net was, he was walking behind it. And I'm not sure if it was intentional or not, but the kids were continuing to shoot while he was walking past and hit him with the ball. So I don't remember from his story whether it was intentional or not, but end result, he ended up getting hit with the basketball. The older kids all saw it. Younger kids from his class saw it. And he remembered what we had talked about, excuse me, and he chose to just laugh along with everybody else and save face and play it off. And I was so, oh, Romero and I were just so proud and happy. It was such a great, relevant example. And so we talked with his group, all elementary kids, about if he would have had a big reaction to that, do we think the kids would have continued to try to hit him with a basketball? Right? And the answer is probably so, because that's what happens, unfortunately, when we have a reputation for having big reactions. And in this group, we've had this conversation before. So the kids are aware of that connection between the reactions we have and the likelihood that other kids will continue to push and poke at us. We talked about how if he would have had a big reaction to getting hit with the ball, they probably would have set that scenario up again. But he didn't. He played it off and played along with everybody else. And so then we talked about how his reputation now, not only is it probably just typical, right? It may even be cool. The next time the older kids see him, they may even remember that he got hit with the ball and he totally played it off. And they may think that that was pretty cool. So just one decision had a big effect on this kiddo's reputation. Just one thing that we talked about the week prior that he had the chance to use in the moment, and he did. And that one thing has an effect on his reputation. And he was so excited to come and share it with us and tell us about it. That led to a conversation with another student in the group talking about how in her class, they were doing a science experiment. It had something to do with shaving cream. And from what I remember, it got on her hair, in her hair and on her face, and that the other kids were laughing about it. That led to us having a conversation about the difference between people laughing at someone versus at a situation, and how it can be really hard to tell, especially when it's us in that situation. So we talked through examples of if you saw that in a video online, would you laugh about it? Things like people tripping and falling, things like people doing jump scares, things like people farting, people doing pranks on each other, all kinds of things that the person in that situation might not really think is so funny, but everybody observing it laughs about it. Those are how things become viral videos, right? Because everybody else observing it thinks it's funny. But we're not laughing at the person, we're laughing at the situation. So helping the kids understand that those two things are not the same. Sometimes people may be laughing at us. That's very true. And this student felt like that was the case. She felt like the other kids were laughing at her. That may be true. It's important to recognize that that's not always going to be true. Sometimes people are laughing just at the situation. The situation itself was funny. That was a really important, helpful concept for us to be able to reinforce with the kids. And it had nothing to do with our lesson. It's just some of these side conversations that we have as things come up, because the things that the kids bring up that they want to talk about or ask about are more valuable than the content that we have on hand every week, because there are things that the kids are actively wondering about or thinking about. During the course of that same class, the students, we have tables and chairs, but the students don't have to sit down. They don't have to sit in a chair. They can pace, they can sit on the floor. They can really do pretty much anything as long as it's not being disruptive to everybody else. In this particular group, several of our students like to sit on the floor in front of the tables. During the lesson, one of the students was laying down on the floor and then started to get frustrated because someone's feet kept touching her head. My response to that was, you are lying on the floor and your head is where his feet go. So that's all I said about it is I just pointed out, I noticed that you're lying on the floor and that your head is where his feet go. And then we just continued on with the class. That's all I said about it. I didn't tell her to move. I didn't tell him to move. I just pointed out that this is the situation. And then Ramiro and I just moved on and she got up and moved. I think she ended up sitting up. So just that realization that she was actually the one who created that situation. But Ramiro and I didn't tell either one of them what to do. We just pointed out what we noticed about the situation. And then she was free to make her own decision about what she wanted to do about it. Another thing that came up in that group, this goes back to how we talk about problem solving. One of the students that was sitting next to me leaned over to me during the lesson and whispered to me that her head hurt. So I'm going to share the strategy that I use for this in situations where there's not really anything I can do to fix it or make it better. And if I'm also not sure if it's a genuine situation or if it's something that somebody's saying to get out of something or to get attention or whatever. No matter what the reason is, it's always valid. It's always okay to want to get out of something. It's always okay to want attention, right? All that's always valid. But if I'm not really sure where something's coming from, or if it's a situation that there's not really anything I can do about it, I'll share with you how I handle that. So she leaned over and whispered to me, Steph, my head hurts. And so I responded with, how can I help? And she repeated it. My head just really hurts. And I said, okay, how can I help? And then she paused for a minute and she pointed and she said, it's like right here. It just really hurts. So I said it again. Okay, how can I help? And then she said, maybe I can have some Tylenol. And I said, I actually don't have any Tylenol. Do you have any other ideas? And she didn't. And then she just turned around and went back to participating in the group. At the time, I think something had been said that was basically giving her feedback for some choices that she had made. And I think she was a little bit embarrassed and trying to remove herself from the situation. My goal was to help her. If there was something she wanted me to do, maybe she needed to go get a drink of water, maybe she wanted to take a break. I want her to be able to use that verbiage instead of just talking about the problem. I want her to be able to think of a solution. I don't want to be the one that's always coming up with the solutions. That's what we encourage the kids to do. But by just engaging in that conversation with her, she felt okay enough to go back to the group afterward. She didn't, and nothing else came out of it. She didn't keep talking about her head hurting. She didn't do anything else. I think she was a little bit embarrassed and she was looking for a distraction. And I think the 10 seconds or whatever was long enough for it to serve its purpose. So jump to game time. Same day, some of the same students plus some other students that come in for game time. Game time is where we really get to see the growth in cognitive flexibility in our students. And Ramiro is like very heavily nodding his head over there. Game time is where we really get to see how much our kids are learning and growing in their capacity to get along with other kids. We have one student who historically has always wanted to pick the game, always wanted to go first, always wanted to be a certain color, has a bit of a stronger personality, and so will pick people to play with that she knows she can dominate. I don't know really what led to this, but well, I think other kids have gotten tired of playing with her because of those things. Natural social consequences, right? We talked about that on a previous episode. The natural social consequence, positive or negative, is other people's attention. So when she repeatedly engages in these behaviors, other kids over time find someone else to play with. So she's ended up playing with a different student than she usually does. And this other student does not accommodate her always wanting to go first and always wanting to pick the game. He does such a good job of giving her feedback and saying things like, I think you picked the last game. He's very non confrontational, but very good at just being assertive, right? Saying what he's thinking and how he's feeling in a non confrontational way. So the last few weeks, the two of them have been playing together. This particular day, they were playing a game that she has never played before, which for our kids that tend to like to be a little more dominating, usually they don't play new games because they don't know that they can win and they don't know how to play and they don't like being in that vulnerable situation. So usually they default to games that they know. But this week, at his urging, she played a game she's never played before. Such a cool moment. It seems like such a small thing, but it's not. It's a significant thing when some of our kids who are a little less flexible are willing to do something they've never done before. It's a really big deal. Also, in this game time, we had a kiddo who didn't like any of the games the other kids were playing, didn't really want to join anything. There was a group that was making up their own imaginary game and running around, running amok everywhere. There was a group that was playing a board game. There was another group that was playing a two-player game. There might have even been a fourth option. And he just decided that he didn't want to play any of the things that were being played. The way that we handle that here is back to the concept of everything is always their choice. We don't tell kids what to do. There's nothing they have to do. Everything is always their choice. Our intention is to make sure they understand the consequences of the choices that they make. One of the things we started doing a couple of years ago that has worked so brilliantly is we have some kids who, because they're younger or because they're newer to our program or because they are coming in pretty inflexible, we started running regular game time for about 35 minutes. And then after that time, we have marble towers and magnetic tiles, and the kids can do those. They can even do them on their own, which it actually doesn't ever work out that way because everybody wants to do them. So they don't ever end up being on their own, but theoretically they could. And it takes the pressure off of having to do structured, organized games for an hour for the kiddos who struggle with that a bit. We've actually ended up incorporating that into all of our game times, even for the kids who've been here for 5 years, even for the kids who are super flexible, even for the kids who are 17. It's just an option for everybody. The caveat is that in order to be able to do whatever you want to when the timer goes off, you have to have been playing in a group. A group is just two people, so it could just be with one other person. You have to have been playing in a group up until that time. So we don't ever tell kids what they have to do or who they have to be with, but we do remind them that if they want to be able to do, it's called marbles and tiles. That's how we all refer to it. If they want to be able to do marbles and tiles, they just have to be in a group with other kids. So everybody knows that that's the expectation. And again, they can make their own choice. They are well aware that if they aren't in a group with other kids, it just means they aren't eligible to do marbles and tiles. They can join another, because sometimes kids keep playing the game they were playing. So they can go join another group who's playing a game. They can continue to sit on the floor on their own, whatever. It just means they're not eligible for marbles and tiles. We have a student who, it's been several months now since this happened, but he, during the lesson, didn't complete the task to end the lesson. And so I just let him know that that was his task before game time, was to complete the task from the lesson before game time. And so he chose to just not ever do it. So he sat on the floor for an hour during game time doing absolutely nothing. And we pointed out to him, just kind of, that seems a little bit silly that you would, choose to just sit and miss all of game time. He has not done that again. A lot of times our kids will do something once just to see, right? I just want to see what's going to happen if I make this choice. And then they don't ever do it again because now they know. Now they know what happened. So that was several months ago that he did that. And he chose to sit out during all of game time. This particular week, another student was just kind of wandering around during game time. And then the timer went off for marbles and tiles. And this student went to go get marbles. And the kiddo who had chosen to be out several months earlier walked over to him and said, but were you in a group? And I saw this interaction happen and I had to walk away because it made me laugh that he had taken it upon himself. So the student who sat out a few months ago was elementary. The student that he was approaching is high school and has been here for 5 years. I don't know. And so he just said to him, were you in a group? And the other student looked at him and said, no. And he said, oh, well, you have to be in a group if you want to do marbles and tiles. So I don't think you're able to do marbles and tiles. And I love that the kids internalize our processes here and they use them, right? Like Ramiro and I never were even part of that interaction. But I just thought that was so awesome that he had internalized that process. And then he was trying to help another kid with kind of how things work around here. So yeah, I just had to go to another room because it was making me giggle. But that was really cool that number one, he has not chosen to miss game time again. And number two, he was actually trying to support another student in understanding how things work around here. One strategy that we really love to use when we do have kids that are really cognitively flexible is we love to think of ways that we can incentivize that. And again, we don't do rewards or punishments here. There's no such thing. There's no treasure chest. There's no sticker chart. There's no smiley faces. There's no note home to mom or dad. It just is what it is. But again, the biggest natural social consequence is people's attention. We love to reinforce when kids are flexible. So for example, if we have 4 students playing a game and they're disagreeing on who's going to go first, if we have one kid who says, well, you can go first, we will jump in and say, oh, thank you for being so flexible. Actually, you get to go first. Thank you for being so flexible. And then we'll just walk away, right? And just kind of leave that little nugget with the group that we reward flexibility. In the group, I don't even remember why we did this. There was a student, gosh, now we're a little bit behind on our recording. So this is from 10 days ago at this point. I don't remember what she said or did, but something caused us to basically give her a pass on the next activity in the lesson. That if she wanted to do the next activity, she was more than welcome to, because she's very engaged in the lessons. Oh, yes. Ramiro for the win. I think we were up doing our poll. So sometimes in the lessons, we'll do a poll and we'll have the kids pick a spot on the wall to match their answer for the poll. And when they came back to their chairs, we have some rolly chairs and some stationary chairs. She had been sitting in a rolly chair and another student was not, but wanted to be. So they ended up sitting in the same chair. They were pretty cool about it. They like each other. So they were pretty cool about it, but it became really distracting for everybody else that they were sitting in the same chair because they don't both fit on the chair. So it became quite a distraction. So I just said something like, hey, you guys figure out what you want to do about the chair situation so that we can move on. and just completely left it. I didn't tell either one of them to move. I didn't take the chair away. I didn't tell either one of them that they couldn't sit there. I didn't tell the one student that somebody else was there first. I just said, you guys figure out what you want to do, so that we can still have rolling chairs. So one of the student who was actually sitting there first got up and moved to a different chair. And so thank you. That's when I told her, thank you for being so flexible. You have a pass on the next activity if you want it. So it's just reinforcing our kids for being flexible and being willing to change their mind or do something differently or give to somebody else. So that's a really great strategy if you want to implement that at home, if you're a parent, or in your classroom, if you're a teacher, just really reinforcing when kids are flexible. Another thing that came up during game time, in our game times, the students are all mixed ages. Our lessons are age specific, but game time is everybody has the same schedule. So we have all ages during game time. We have a group of kids that are high school and young adults that always play together on this certain day. And most of them, all of them have been here at least a year and a half, some of them several years. They all know each other. They all like each other. They get along really well. They have really cool, just side conversations. So in their side conversations, they were talking about, I think they were talking about a video, and one of the students said horse shit, which is part of the video. They are high school and young adult. I do not care that she said horse shit. It is totally age appropriate. It is not the worst thing that somebody their age could say by far. I absolutely do not care, except that we are mixed ages. And so in the same room were elementary kids. And as soon as she said it, she realized, right, that it wasn't the right context. And so we just had a conversation with the group, reinforcing the fact that we do not care. It is not inappropriate for their age group to say something like that. We just want them to be aware of the context, right? That when we're in game time, there are also younger kids. In their class time, there's not, because they're in an older class. So if she would have said it during class time, we probably wouldn't have even talked about it at all. But just to reinforce the concept of context. Context is, where are we? Who else is there? What's going on, right? That's the context. So different things may be socially appropriate or socially inappropriate based on the context. So just reinforcing that with our kids. What she said is not bad or wrong, because we don't even believe in those concepts here. It just was not appropriate for the context. That's all. Same game time. In a previous episode, we talked about the kiddo who came in and was new to that day, and how he was very anxious about asking if he could join this same group. It's this older group, and how I supported and encouraged him into joining them. So this is the week later, same group, same situation. He came in a little bit late, and most of these kids in this group sit on the floor. They play Uno almost every week. They sit on the floor. So they're all sitting on the floor. There's maybe 8 of them in this group. And this kiddo came around the corner, and one of the kids recognized him and said, "Hey, so-and-so's here," which warmed my heart so much, because they had just met him the week before. And so he recognized him, he remembered his name, and he called him out, right? "Hey, so-and-so's here." I just thought that was the coolest. So the next thing that happened is another student in the group heard the student one say, "Hey, so-and-so's here." And so she said, "Hey, do you want to play with us?" Just the coolest conversation, because our kids aren't always aware of each other, right? They don't always notice other people. So one student noticed him and called him out, and another student invited him to go play with them. Super cool. I didn't notice at the time, but I saw that the student kind of got hesitant. And then I noticed he just kind of kneeled down on the floor. And that's when I realized he didn't know where to go. They were sitting in like a semicircle on the floor, and he didn't know where to go because nobody moved. So as soon as I recognized that that's what had happened, I said, "Hey guys, let me tell you what I just noticed. I noticed that this student came in the door. This student said, 'Hey, he's here,' which is amazing. Thank you for being so thoughtful. This student asked, 'Hey, do you want to come play with us?' Thank you for being so welcoming." And then I noticed, and as these words are coming out of my mouth, a third student moved and made room for him in the group before I even said it. Oh my gosh. Ramiro and I were both there. We were like, ah, that's so cool. We didn't even have to, the words did not even have to come out of our mouth. So, this is why we love the noticing strategy so much, because it's never us telling kids what to do. We don't even have to tell them what's going on. We just have to notice the situation and then let them take it from there. And that's exactly what happened. Is I just said, I noticed that somebody welcomed him. Somebody asked if he wanted to play. And before I even said it, a third student moved so that he had somewhere to sit. And it reminded me that the week before, I thanked the student who moved over for him. So I planted that seed. The week before, I said, "Oh, so and so, thank you for moving over so that he knows where to go." Because Ramiro and I are constantly talking out loud, right? Constantly talking out loud. So when we notice that somebody moved for him and we say it out loud, now the kids have that in their brain. Oh, we move so that people know where to sit. And then that student remembered it the next week and he did it. That was really cool. In the same group, one of the things as our students get older and bodies change and things change is we don't always recognize how we're sitting, what we're wearing, what may be showing. Most of our students just don't have that level of body and self-awareness. And it can put them in some awkward situations. We can maybe be showing things that we don't realize we're showing. We can, have clothes in a weird way that just makes us kind of look awkward or uncomfortable. I noticed that, again, these students are sitting on the floor. One of the girls in the group, the shirt that she was wearing, if she would have been sitting in a chair, probably would have been totally fine. Walking around school, probably totally fine. Because they were sitting on the floor, every time she would lean forward to play, because they were playing Uno, her shirt would hang down very low. And she's older, so she's, her body is changing. I could also see that one of the boys in the group was noticing. And I could tell that she was completely oblivious to the whole thing. My goal was to help her be more aware without embarrassing her. I did not want to say something that would make her feel like she had done something wrong or that she couldn't wear that shirt. I did not want to embarrass her, but I did want to make her aware of her body and what was happening. So I pulled her out of the group so that, clearly this is not a group discussion. And I just said to her, I notice that when you lean forward, your shirt comes down. And I'm just a little concerned that it might be showing more than you're comfortable with. And so I had her do it so that she could see, because when we were talking, we're standing up. And so she just looked down and everything was fine, right? Because she's standing up. So I had her actually lean forward so she could see what was happening with her shirt. And so as soon as she recognized that, she was able to adjust her shirt. And then she went back to the group. And then I could tell that she was much more aware of it and she was paying attention to it. So just making sure that things, even things like sometimes our kids wear shirts, especially if our kids wear clothes that are too small for them. We see this sometimes with our kids who are heavier, that if they're wearing clothes that are too small and their stomachs are hanging out, or their underwear is showing in the back, or other things are showing in the back, they are oblivious to it. It's such a small thing that can make a huge difference in their reputation. If we're not having our tummy hanging out, if our underwear isn't showing, if our crack isn't hanging out, it's a small thing that can make a big difference. And for this student, it wasn't so much about her reputation, but I didn't want to think about people looking at her and seeing more of her than she realized she was showing. That's what I kept thinking about, is this poor girl, there's more of her hanging out than she realizes. And I think if somebody were to say something to her, she would be really embarrassed about it. So I just wanted to nip that in the bud, and also just make her aware that that might be something that's happening. Okay, fast forward to our group, high school and older. So a lot of the same kids that from the game time story. In the room where we do our lessons, we have the table set up like a horseshoe with the chairs around the outside. And as I mentioned, some are rolly and some are stationary. And then Ramiro and I sit in the horseshoe, like the head of the horseshoe, so that we can see all the kids, and they can, it's like a circle, but it's a horseshoe. So everybody can see each other. Basically, there's not rows, there's not individual. We're all in a group, but everybody can see each other. So we did our poll where I asked the kids a question, and then I have them stand up and go stand, under what they think on the wall. It's a way for us to get the kids engaged and to get some movement going on. So sometimes we have them planned. Sometimes I'll do them if I just notice that we're kind of losing people. We'll just do a poll to get everybody up and moving. So we did the poll. This group is actually larger. We combined a couple groups. So I think we had 9 students on this day. 8 of them stood up and walked over to the wall. One of them chose to roll his chair all the way behind the horseshoe, all the way over to the other side of the room to the wall. So again, I'm not going to tell him what to do, because that's not how we operate here. I said, I noticed that everybody else stood up and walked. And his response was, yeah, that's why I want to do something different. I totally let that go. That is not at all something that I am going to get into a power struggle over. Here's what happened. He could not get over to the wall because of how many kids are in the group. He was running into people and running over people's feet, and they were giving him feedback because they were getting frustrated with him. When we went back to our seats, all the kids walked back to their chairs, and he could not get back to where he was at the table, because once everybody was sitting down, there was not room for his chair to either go behind the group because there was a wall, or in front of the group because I had also gone back to my chair, which was blocking his way. He could not get back to the table. I chose to pretend like I had no idea this was going on. If he would have asked me to move, I would have. He did not. He kept trying to figure out how to get back, and there was just no way for him to get back. He ended up sitting on the outside of the horseshoe the whole time. He was still contributing and participating just like he always is, but he very much was outside of the group. And just like how I talked about earlier, how our kids like to do something once, I guarantee you he will not roll his chair over to the pole again. But again, that's when we talk about natural social consequences. There's no reason for me to tell him what to do. There's no reason for me to tell him he cannot take his chair, because he can. There's no reason for me to tell him to get up and walk. There's no reason for me to, get on to him because now he can't get back to the table. He realizes he can't get back to the table. There's nothing that I need to say or do about that situation, except just let it play itself out and let it be what it is. I didn't realize until after class was over, an hour later, that all his stuff was on the table. His cell phone, I think there was something else that he had brought, was all over on the table. So we don't use our phones during class, but just knowing that he spent that whole hour not only separated from where he was, but from all his stuff as well. So guarantee you he won't do that again, but he learned that on his own. He didn't learn that by somebody getting on to him and nagging him and telling him what to do. He learned it on his own. I want to also tag that into conversation about things like phones here at Starfish. I feel like we talked about it before, but I just want to tag on because it came up again in this same group. We do not take things away from kids unless there's a safety issue, which I can't tell you the last time that's happened. Excuse me. So we don't take phones away. We don't take games away. We don't take game pieces away. We let the kids know the expectations. And if it becomes an issue, they might not be able to play that game again next time, or have that fidget again next time, or bring that phone back next time. That's all that it is. In this group, there's a student who really struggles with not being able to check her phone. So if there's an alert, if there's something that comes through, sometimes even if she just gets distracted, she has her phone open chronically throughout her time here. The other students have started giving her feedback because it's disruptive to the group, right? When we can all see each other, we're all sitting around and she keeps taking her phone out. It's disruptive to the other kids. They have started giving her feedback about it. And it happened in this group. And the student sitting next to her said, you know, when I bring my phone, I keep it in my pocket. And he said it so kindly and so supportive. He was not at all trying to be, bossy. And it came across, right? It came across as a very kind thing to say. And she just said, I don't have pockets. And so I said, well, what do you guys think? If you don't have pockets, where else do you think you could keep a phone? Because sometimes I don't have pockets either. Today I'm wearing leggings, right? Where else could you keep a phone? And so we talked about, since we're sitting in chairs, we can put it under us, we can put it behind us. But I just thought it was really cool that his sole intention was to be helpful, to give her a suggestion or an idea of something that he thought would be helpful for her. We do have a conversation about, if it continues to be an issue, you might not be able to bring it back in the future. But we don't take phones away. We don't take things away from kids. In this situation, we very much recognize that this is possibly an obsession for this student. It's not something that she's doing intentionally to be disruptive or distracting. I think it's truly, the possibility exists that she's addicted to her phone, and that she is addicted to not responding to things or not knowing what's coming through. So there's a different level to it. It's not her trying to be disruptive or distracting or anything like that. I think it's truly neurological. I don't know that she's always even aware that she's pulled her phone out. I think sometimes it's just impulsive. Okay. One other thing that I just want to share that Ramiro and I were really talking about after this group is, sometimes we have to think about the past to recognize how far kids have come, because we see them every week. And so the growth, sometimes things happen significantly, right? Sometimes one week you're like, oh my gosh, look at what so-and-so's doing, or look at what he's playing, or, things like that. But usually it's a process. And so we will sometimes just remember something, that how things used to be. And there's a student in this group that's been with us for several years, heavy social anxiety, to the point that he can be selectively mute, just does not answer questions. We actually have several students in our program at various stages of social anxiety. We have students who don't answer questions from other people. We have students who used to be in that place and are no longer in that place. I think we talked about one on a previous episode who cried one time when I was asking him a question, and now he's the loudest kid in game time, hooting and hollering and whatever. So this kiddo in particular has been with us for several years, and just so anxious about answering questions, about being put on the spot. And the first thing that we started to notice a couple of years ago, I would say, is that he just started making little comments, little like pithy comments that are like funny, but that show that he's engaged and invested. Because when kids don't talk, you don't always know, right? So he'll just start saying things like, really? Or, oh, wow. Or just little things like that. Sometimes he'll say something that's just funny, but it shows that he's actively involved in what we're doing. His level of engagement and participation has come so far. It's still not the level of most of the other kids in the group. But for him, it's not about comparing kids to each other. It's about where he was and where he is now, and how now when we're practicing different strategies, he can actually engage in practicing. Whereas a year ago, 2 years ago, no, that was not happening. And we would have to be one-on-one for him to actually try something. And he would be visibly nervous and he would run out the door as soon as we were done. And now sometimes he's not even the last one to try, and he'll try it in front of the group, and he's not visibly nervous anymore, and he's not running out the door. So just being able to think about where kids were functioning a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. I found some recordings from years ago before Ramiro was even here. And oh my gosh, just to see the difference in the kids in the time that they've been here. So cool. Because again, it's not about how they function socially compared to the kids sitting next to them. It's about how they function socially compared to how they did a year ago or 2 years ago. So I'm going to end on that note, just the excitement that we feel when we take a minute and think about, do you remember 6 months ago? Do you remember 2 years ago when this kiddo, wouldn't ever play something new, or was complaining about everything every week? Or even yesterday, I had a conversation with a mom that maybe 6 weeks ago, her kiddos knew he was crying and screaming in the waiting room and refusing to come in. And I was able to get him to come in pretty easily, actually. But he was he's little, so he's physically flailing about, and he's screaming and crying and refusing to come in, and mom's frustrated, and it's a whole scene. And ever since then, he literally runs in the door. He came in late a couple weeks ago, and the door opened, and I saw dad by himself, and I was confused, and I looked over at Ramiro, and Ramiro said he's already gone. He had like opened the door, and he was already back and playing a game with kids. So just in 1 week, we've never gone back to him not wanting to be here. So just in 1 week, he went from refusing to come in and kicking and yelling and melting down in the waiting room to he runs in the door every time now. So yeah, just the growth, the being able to see a different path for our kids. I think that's my favorite part, is being able to see a different path the longer kids are here and the more they grow. So, okay, we will be back. Hopefully Ramiro will be feeling better, and we will be back with another episode to talk even more about the things that happen here. So thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.